What do you guys think about plastic bottles now?
The water setting is at 105 now.
We got a TDI here. Clean diesel. You're good to go, sir.
This 2010 Super Bowl ad says it all. Green never felt so right. We will continue to see the influence of this green movement in our ads until a point where the idea is so ordinary and uncommon that we will move on to the next trend.
What do you guys think about plastic bottles now? Plastic bottles now.
The water setting is at 105 now.
We got a TDI here. Clean diesel. You're good to go, sir.
Having traced advertising through history and economics, considered its biological and psychological techniques, and witnessed its pervasiveness in American society, we must now turn to that most intimate of subjects, ourselves. I wish to call you back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This model gave us a vision into how advertisers are appealing to the person, giving us a preliminary model for viewing the order of desires. The pyramid is built in such a way that it depicts satisfaction of the more basic needs, opening up to and allowing for the fulfillment of the higher needs. Advertising aims to link a generic need to a particular product. The generic need of Maslow's model becomes a specific desire. Is advertising a response to needs we already have, or does it incite new desires? The answer is yes to both forms of the question. These desires are intrinsic to human nature and never leave us. Thus, Maslow's model truly works as a model for human motivation. Advertisements, however, through images and messages laden with emotional power, incite these desires. Our more basic desires are brought to the surface by images of food and safety, while our more transcendent desires bubble up with images of friendship, self-worth, or happiness. Not only do advertisements inflame desires, but they also aim to associate desires with specific products. We earlier noted the association through classical conditioning, and now it can help to better understand advertising in relation to a person's desires.
If advertisers are creating an association between a product and man's desires, we must then ask if this coincides with the proper order of the human person. If it does not coincide with the proper order, where is the problem? Generally speaking, the products being advertised in and of themselves are good. They can satisfy certain basic desires of man. An advertisement for a hamburger is communicating a material good that can satisfy the desire of hunger. Not only are the products good, but the desires they satisfy are also good. Satisfaction of desires is not necessarily opposed to the truly good and worthwhile. If one is thirsty and desires an ice-cold Coca-Cola on a hot summer's day, drinking a Coke can be quite satisfying and can also evoke very pleasant emotions. This is not a problem as long as the satisfaction is not inordinate. Drinking 7 Cokes a day may prove to be problematic. However, if advertisements move beyond mere satisfactions and relate these material goods to the fulfillment of man's higher desires, such as Maslow's higher needs of love and belonging, this creates an absurd association. The desires of man are being manipulated and disordered, and this is problematic for the human person. For example, one can hardly claim that it is in mayonnaise very nature to fulfill desires for social acceptance, as was illustrated in the not-so-mayo commercial. These associations become absurd and are damaging to the human person because they no longer attempt to satisfy basic desires of the body, but instead claim to fulfill man's higher desires. This fosters internal disorder by encouraging a person to look to material goods to fulfill man's higher spiritual desires. This may not be the case every time someone drinks a Coke. It might not be viewed as true happiness in a bottle. But the fact that these types of absurd associations are even being made in advertising can be threatening to the human person by relating the fulfillment of man's noblest aspirations to the consumption of a material good. Furthermore, one must begin to question the very motive for this type of advertising.
The absurdity of these associations is aggravated by the purpose of advertising, financial transaction. Advertisements are created to bring about an exchange of money for some product. With the higher desires involved in the product, they too are involved in the transaction. This is problematic. Persons are depicted as able to buy fulfillment for higher desires. As the old saying goes, one cannot buy happiness or fulfillment for one's higher desires. While no one truly believes in the ability to buy friendship, esteem, or fulfillment, the images and messages say otherwise. Buy Miracle Whip to meet in the cool crowd. Buy Coke to be happy. This depiction is damaging to the vision of the human person. One may rationally know that this is absurd, but images and messages laden with emotional power penetrate us in some way, affecting our vision of the world and the person. The manipulation of desires in association and financial transaction illuminates for us the vision of the human person guiding advertisers. They see and treat human persons inordinately as consumers. Lifestyles are depicted that are centered upon buying products. A person's life is depicted as concerned with consuming. Consumption is not in itself a bad thing. We must take in goods that will satisfy our desires and needs. However, to raise consumption to such a pedestal as advertising depicts is a deficient vision of the human person, and ultimately damaging to true integral fulfillment. If this type of association does not promote true and authentic order in man, we must also ask what implications it has on one's ability to order himself through the use of his will.
If advertising makes use of absurd associations, then we must question the relation between advertising and the human will. In order to do so, we need the philosophical model of the will's operation. In constructing such a model, it might be useful to start from what our patrons, Thomas Aquinas and Aristotle, have to say about the nature of the will. Aristotle defines the human will as the power of the soul which moves us, meaning that our will drives us to action. He also insists that the action of the will must aim toward something, the object, which we experience as a good for us. Advertisers have a specific good in mind, the product they are presenting, and a specific action they expect from us, purchasing that product, which we can call the ultimate goal of advertising. However, as they cannot physically coerce the viewer into doing so, there must be some immediate activity which takes place earlier in the process of decision. If the end of the will is the object, the beginning is our desires, we act in order to satisfy them by taking possession of the object. We might logically assume that advertising acts directly upon our desires. Seeing an advertisement instills a desire in us. However, the reality of the advertising industry suggests that the truth is more subtle. It spends millions of dollars conducting focus groups and market research, attempting to find out what their target audience wants. For example, a sense of community or individuality. This implies that advertisers learn our desires rather than instilling them. An advertisement might make us desire the specific product, but on a more general level, our desires remain unchanged, meaning that it must be something about the product, the object of desire, that changes. As advertisers identify the desires of their target audience, they present the product in terms of those desires, the halo effect mentioned as one of the techniques of advertising. We saw this in the commercials, especially the Miracle Whip ads, which depicted a simple condiment as being somehow nonconformist. Before we can desire the object, we must perceive it as a good. While the act of will begins with a person's desires, the act of perception begins with the object and moves toward our responsive desire. Perhaps the direct activity of advertising takes place here. After all, advertising presents an opportunity to control how the viewer perceives the product. Seen in this light, advertising's direct activity changes the object itself. The physical product is cloaked in such transcendent goods as a sense of independence. If, as we have established, advertisers learn the audience's desires rather than instilling them, then the audience is still free to order their own values. However, we have also shown how the advertisers control our perception of their product, presenting it as the solution to our deeper desires, the kind of manipulation. A responsible, proactive viewer has the power to consider whether the object presented truly reflects his own desires, which is likely the best means to prevent a disordering of the will.